KwaZulu-Natal. I'm the UN convener for traditional leaders in South Africa and religious leaders. I think what I would like to hear more is more on advocacy, so that our gathering here results on accountability and action, because most of the time when we engage in policy, government, and multi-sectorial, it's just talking, but no practical advocacy that results in policy and practical actions. Yet, traditional leaders, they own wealth in terms of land. So I would like to hear more on the advancing of the narrative of the role of traditional leaders and religious leaders on, but more on advocacy.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Just pass it on. Anybody else? Tim?
My greatest strength is that I'm very ignorant. That means that almost anything you say will mean that I will learn something, and I mean that quite sincerely. I've grown up in the Western tradition. I studied philosophy in college, but I think the Western mindset can be very different from the traditional knowledge. And so I'm interested in seeing things that challenge my own traditional thinking so that I can be more open-minded and be open to the wisdom of the traditional communities. So I'm interested in some of the key points where traditional communities see the world differently and where they would like to have this point of view reflected more in what our governments do.
See, this is interesting, just to know your audience and something you can reflect on. Maybe somebody else, wherever there's a hand, I saw somewhere there. Meneer Plaatjes.
Good morning. My name is Cecil Plaatjes. I'm representing CTII, which is the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative. To me, the space in which we find ourselves is Africa. So in terms of the discussion and the themes of the program, that should be the major focus. So I'm from, the religion that I represent is Buddhism, which is actually a minority religion in the country, all right? So from my personal point of view, there shouldn't be less Buddhist voices, because we also have to have the minority voices too. They are very important, and I'm very glad that we actually do have Buddhist voices on the panels and right up in front. But I would have loved to have seen a lot more voices coming from the African spirituality and traditional culture side of things. And of course, African spirituality isn't just one single thing. Just like all other religions have their own complexities and varieties. So that should also be respected within the South African or Southern African space. So that's why I'm here, you know. And I'm also here, I'm open to learning, because I'm also on my own road of discovering my African spirituality. I grew up Christian, and I decided to change my faith to Buddhism. Thank you.
No, thank you very, very much. And so we, of course, we'll be looking at traditional communities in this sector, and just to listen to their voices. We'll come, yeah, do you please, you were first, and then we'll pass it on to Professor Masuma.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think that when you talk about modernization, much changes by way of how we perceive development and what development looks like. But sometimes that happens at the expense of knowledge that humanity has garnered over centuries, decades, millennia. And the same knowledge that allowed individuals to form families, for families to form city-states, for city-states to form nations, And now we live in an era of a globalized family, if we like. And so it's almost going to be important for us to understand what about these wisdoms, traditional wisdom that allowed us to progress and evolve as a humanity would now stand us in good stead. And how do we, really teach these concepts such as the oneness of mankind in schools as well, so that you remove all this kind of unnecessary distinction that separates people.
No, thank you very much, Professor Musoma.
Thank you so much, the moderator. I thought that what we are called upon to do here, first is an appreciation of the wisdoms of traditional communities and assess how those wisdoms, as she has indicated, have shaped communities in the past. In which way have they been compromised in their work to shape communities today? And what are the challenges, and how can we retrieve those wisdoms? Let me give you an example. In my community, we had a concept and a way of life called Mafisa. Mafisa concept idea was in economic empowerment of people who come into a community destitute. How do you make sure that they're integrated into the community, but they're given this necessary empowerment? You then give them a cow to plow, give them a goat, and these things are leased to them. The more the flock grows, they remain with a part of the what you call of the flock, and the part of the flock returns to other people. It's part of what we call collective prosperity. Now it's no longer there. Those are wisdoms. Amalima. Amalima. It meant if you had a building, you have no house. People will come with pieces of building blocks and build a house for you, as you would do and participate in building houses for others as well. That is a community empowerment. So what have we lost? Because we're now just pieces of individuals.
No, thank you very well. Okay, just let's take one more right at the back there.
Hi, I'm Shimona. I think it would be helpful to explore the complementary roles of different types of knowledge systems, including traditional knowledge, so that we don't see it as contradictory or in competition, but rather as complementary. And then also, how can traditional knowledge play a role in advancing the systems and processes of society so that we can promote gender equality, the full participation of youth, effective strategies to address climate and food security issues. So how can the role of traditional knowledge be seen also in a new light, but in a close relationship with other modes of knowledge?
All right, thank you very much. Like I said, I put the cart before the horse to hear what are issues that you are having. Now we're going to start with the panel session. Thank you very much for all of you that are here. It's good to have you here. And this session is, of course, going to be focused on distinctive wisdom. And I think that's the buzzword, distinctive wisdom. And we will be looking at the special challenges facing traditional communities. But here's an interesting thing. And I think what's important is in the traditional communities, I think our traditional communities pride themselves on the insight in the tight bonds between human life and the natural environment. And that is of great concern to our traditional communities. But yet, and I think I heard some of you speaking about this, that there are some forces that accelerate deforestation. We've heard that in the plenary this morning. Land degradation and displacement and pressures for mining. We've heard that coming out this morning, especially of critical minerals, threaten both the environment and traditional ways of life. So a lot of this has come out in the plenary this morning. So this session that we are going to be engaging in now, and I'm happy the panelists have heard some of the issues that you have raised and what you want to hear about. We'll look at some of the challenges, wisdom, and solidarity in the quest for solutions. So I'm very grateful that with me here, we're supposed to have been three. Mamzi Shebolai, we're not too sure. We cannot find her. But we do have two very, very interesting and people that are going to bring to us distinctive wisdom in the form of Mekwena Marsha. She is the director of the Baha'i Faith in South Africa. Welcome. It's good to have you here with us, as well as with Reverend Tembi Tulwana, who is the Secretary General of the Ukhululeku Yesizwe Association of South Africa. And we sit at their feet to listen to this distinctive wisdom, especially in relation to the challenges, wisdom, and the solidarity, I think, in the quest of finding solutions of what we are seeing happening currently and how it affects our traditional communities. So let's go forward first with Mekwena, if you could address us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning? Yes, it's still morning. I think I'm, of course, very grateful for the opportunity to offer my own very little contribution, and I must start by correcting dear Prof, because I'm the director of the Office of Public Affairs in South Africa, because where you put me is another level. It's one that I'm not ready for. And it's also one that almost speaks to an expert level in this subject, where I honestly am not far from it, actually. When I, excuse me, when I received the call to contribute particularly to this topic, it was one that almost shook me a little bit, because there was a recognition that even for myself as an African in South Africa, when it comes to the distinctive wisdom of the African traditions, I myself am lacking very much. I found that when I tried to look back into my own history, I don't know a lot. I've observed a lot, I've experienced a bit, but I cannot say that I know enough to speak. So of course then I went into the Baha'i faith, where I am a member of the Baha'i faith, and decided, let me see what I can find there that comes across that might speak to this. And I love what the Universal House of Justice, the supreme body of the Baha'i faith in the world, they shared an excerpt, which I'll share with you today, about Africa and African life. And I thought this was quite apt on the basis of the topic today. And I will read this little piece for you, and it says, "Much of what distinguishes African life is to be found in the patterns of behavior displayed in the tribe and particularly in the family. Increasingly, urban life threatens to destroy the positive qualities of such patterns. Since change is inevitable if progress is to be made by any African society, a primary challenge to Baha'is is to preserve and improve those wholesome aspects of tribal and family custom that are in accord with the Baha'i teachings, and to dispense with those that are not. Such a challenge must be embraced with the understanding that the Book of God is the standard by which to weigh all forms of behavior. While unwavering action is necessary, wisdom and tact and patience must, of course, be exercised. let it be understood that, 2, that Africans are not alone in the struggle to change certain age-old practices. People everywhere have customs which must be abandoned so as to clear the path along which their societies must evolve towards that glorious new civilization which is to be the fruit of Baha'u'llah's stupendous revelation. So when I read this, one of the things that came up for me, what the House of Justice brings up as one of the threats that we're seeing, is urban life, right? For me, this is modernization, what we see as modernization now. I can imagine that even times of old, there was a period when others felt what is happening now is modernization. So it's modernization in the context of today, which they say really it threatens to destroy the positive qualities that are found in the family, in the tribes, which are the patterns that have helped civilization to move, right? And when I thought of this, one of the first things that I thought was definitely, it's not that modernization is a bad thing. It's not that urban life is a bad thing. But I think paramount to it is our reaction to it. Do we see it as a complete threat that will eradicate our traditions? Or are we able to actually chart a way that enables us to bring the two together and say what, and especially because the House of Justice speaks about weighing behaviors according to the Book of God, what does the Book of God say we should do when it comes to certain traditions that now have to contend with urbanization or with modernity? You know, as I was thinking of this, one of the things that came to mind was that we're always told, I don't know if you've ever heard this thing, that if you can't beat them, join them. I've heard a lot of that. So if your traditions don't seem to fit, then almost eradicate them. And I don't believe that this is what is meant to be the case, that we do away with all of traditions. One of the things that made me think this was that and one of the MCs mentioned it one of the days as he was trying to address dear Catherine, to say where I come from, in my culture and my tradition, we don't address an elder without a title. It's always in Sesotho, me someone, ndate someone, it's malume someone, it's rakgadi someone, it's ausi someone, abuti someone, right? And with this in mind, my children now are meeting, you know, others in society that you know, we are now in this bit more modern life. And for me, it's very difficult not to say to them, you can call the person by name. Even if somebody says that, no, for me, it's okay, call me by name. I am there with a stick, no, you must call them, you know, it's me, because that's respect. But a friend said to me, number one, traditions can change, or this culture can change. There is possibility for it to change. But at the same time, there is a way to show respect without having to use the title. And now I'm sitting here having to contend with this and say, so how does this fit? Because when I think about it for myself, am I able to show respect without actually using your title? Can I call you, you know, Mr. Sugdavant? Yes, I said it right, Sugdavant. And not worry about, I didn't use the titles. And you feel that there is still a sense of respect towards that. So this was something that, for me, came up when I was thinking about this modernization and urbanization, and the fact that our children are now living at a different time to when I was living. And then it made me think about then the way in which we interact, we generate, we apply, and we disseminate knowledge, right? How are the African traditional knowledge, how is that knowledge system still having an impact? A positive impact, by the way, that it can really have. How do we ensure that those positive elements still remain? That, you know, my child still understands the value of respecting an elder, even if they're not calling them Nkhono, whoever, or Ndatemoholo, whoever. And I thought, you know, when I look back, one of the ways in which knowledge is generated in the African tradition, at least in my experience, is through experimentation, it's through observing, and then of course you are, taught certain things, you are told certain things. And then, of course, for yourself, to apply that knowledge, then of course there isn't that element as well of you're going to be experimenting to see what works and what does not work. And then I look at the dissemination part, where this was done through stories, this was done through songs. I know personally my grandmother would tell me the story of Tselane and Dimo as a way to warn young people against those that want to cause them harm. And to this day, I still remember the day, the song that she would sing, that's part of the story, that actually seeks to always be warning young girls against the dangers of this world. But then I think at the same time, my children don't have this at the moment. They're not learning these stories. And now it becomes a matter of, am I recognizing that as an African parent who is also a Baha'i, there is a role that these stories play in actually guiding my children, that these stories have not lost their meaning, they have not lost their significance, and they remain able to assist and to guide humanity and to still be a positive force without it seeming like, oh my goodness, I'm too backwards, oh my goodness, it's too traditional. So, of course, I said I'm not an expert. These were just some of the thoughts that came to mind as I was considering this subject. So maybe I could give others a chance.
Well, thank you very, very much for that. I think you have touched on issues that I think also borders on, has modern, actually we're not even in the postmodern, we could talk about the meta-modern world now. In the meta-modern world that is hitting South Africa and the African context, has that meta-modern world somehow eroded some of our traditional community values? But yes, here's the thing. South Africa is very rich in mining, very rich in minerals. And when a mine is being developed in a rural area, the community that live in the area, how are they affected? Or how do they affect at the same time? Has it caused displacement? The wealth is generated from there. Is it shared with the community whose land has been taken for that purpose of commercialization? Other parts of the world, I think of Brazil, we were there last year, the deforestation that's taking place, the traditional communities, the indigenous communities are slowly, the land is being eroded because of deforestation. How is that? Maybe Reverend Tulmona can assist us with that one. How does that, what wisdom can we learn from our traditional community to say, listen, this has to now be challenged? And how can we effect that challenge?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. Just a correction, I'm not Reverend. Yes. Okay. Just Ms. Tembi Dulwan. To answer that, I'm going to go the other way around so that you can be able to position me and place me where I come from. I come from an indigenous spirituality setting. And in African indigenous spirituality, we recognize, not just us recognizing, we know that African people do have their cultures. And in some instances, they drive their cultures through tradition. But tradition evolves through time until from time immemorial to now, to the modern times. However, we need to understand that each of those elements, especially culture, emanates from spirituality.
And we know that African people are spiritual in nature. Being spiritual in nature, and I do believe that every other person is spiritual in nature. But I want to cling on to the context of African indigenous spirituality. And culture is part of African indigenous spirituality, and not that spirituality is part of culture. Spirituality supersedes anything else that you do as Africans. Now, coming from that position, we do understand that there are natural resources or monuments that have been born by nature. For instance, if you look at mountains, you look at rivers, those are the areas where African people would go there either to pray or to connect with their ancestors or even the Creator. And talking about deforestation, African people utilize forests for a number of things. In forests, there would be those trees that would be used for medicinal purposes in an African context. And as the modern times determine or business requirements come to the fore, you find that a particular forest is removed for whether it's mining or anything else, and those trees are then taken out and they no longer are useful to the people who actually were using them for medicinal purposes and all other purposes, to the extent that removing forests is actually detrimental to the earth in general, because trees are there for various purposes. So if we look at our modern times don't necessarily mean that you are going to be stripped of everything else that you know as a person. However, the communities or even citizens need to connect and speak to government to understand what is it that is important to them as people, and also as worshippers and believers in various spheres. You'll find that in African societies, there would be so many traditions, but that is not a turf we want to get into and fight those traditions, because they are traditions because of where they come from. And if you go to rural areas, even today, you go back where you still have old people, you start talking about a particular tradition, they will indicate to you that no, when King so-and-so came in to reign, that tradition was done away with. Now, in this village, this is how we are going to be dealing with whatever activity that needs to happen. Hence, we are saying tradition changes. So we are not going to be relying on tradition. But when it comes to culture, which is intertwined with your spirituality, you do want to carry on your culture, whether in the modern times or any other time, because it defines who you are. Your spirituality will define who you are and how you carry yourself. But what is important is that from the level of government to any other community, people need to acknowledge that African indigenous spirituality people have a purpose in life. And that purpose is to ensure that they do not lose their essence. They do not lose who they are, but they continue within the context where they live. But the most important context would be the context of their spirituality, because it gives guidance, it teaches one to be able, or enables one to respect, accept everybody else, and be able to coexist with other people. But it is more relevant in society where you find that people say, I am not spiritual. I am whatever they want to call themselves. But that is fine because it is their prerogative. They know who they are. But they cannot go back and say there is nothing like African indigenous spirituality because this is who we are. We cannot be anything else. We are all from the Creator, and we all aspire to do the correct things for the world, for individuals. But coming to issues of deforestation and doing away with every other resource that we have that will help us as African people or African indigenous spirituality people, we do need to really connect with our government, give ideas in terms of how we can preserve some of the resources that are useful to humanity in general, and not prioritize issues of capital, issues of revenue, issues of wanting to grow a particular business, at the expense of people. So that's how we look at it from our side, from where I come from as an African indigenous spirituality practitioner. I need to know that if we do have, of course, we do have traditional healers. They still need to have those herbs, those medicines, because people utilize different types of medicines. And African indigenous medicines are important to people, important for children, elderly people, and the nation as a whole. So in short, trying to respond to the factor of modernization. Modernization will be there because time evolves, but it should not happen at the expense of who the people are and the very important aspects of the practices that African indigenous spirituality people practice, or even wanting to do away with the cultures that the various peoples in South Africa do have. Thanks.
No, thank you very, very much for that. I think recently in South Africa, in the last 5-6 years, we had the issue around the fishing industry. We had the issue around fracking. We had the issue around oil, offshore oiling, drilling, and that type of thing, which affects the environment, which affects the oceans, and so forth. And one can talk about a lot of these things where the whole focus is on generating wealth, generating capital. And of course, there is this aspect of the tying of indigenous communities to the land. The life of the indigenous community is, we always talk about the Mother Earth, the people of the soil, especially in Africa, we use those contexts and those languages. And of course, government will have to sanction, for example, if you want to start mining in a particular place, you have to apply for license, and it goes through the necessary checks and balances. And then the communities, in some instances, are also engaged with to find out from the communities. What do you think will be or what advice will you give to, firstly, the companies that want to engage in this? Secondly, what would you tell the government how it should be done? What solutions would you offer to the government to say, listen, our communities are, as indigenous communities, it's important to us? Any one of the two can answer this question, or both.
Or both. Maybe I'll start in there. Yes. I think very important for me would be consultation. Let's not do things on our own, because then we don't get a sense of the collective. It's very easy to, in the interest of more, in the interest of wealth, in the interest of all of these things, we also encroach on the rights of others, but also on for instance, knowledge systems that are lost because we did not consult. We did not have the conversation that alerts us as to this is what you need to be careful of, this is what you need to be aware of. Because of course, as shared, there is, this indigenous knowledge system. I was thinking about something as simple as when I look at the months of the year in Sesotho, what they're called. And it's the way they are named is they are attached to Mother Nature and agriculture. For instance, the year in Sesotho starts in August. And this is the time when, the seeds are starting, the people are starting to think about planting again, because, July was Pupu, which is funeral, which is almost like death. At the time, nature was dead. Everything was quiet. Nature was holding back. So it was, things were lifeless. But now when it comes to August, it's the time when we start to work on the land. It's called Pado, because we are digging the land and we're working on it. So there is this knowledge that is there that guides us as to how do we interact with the environment when it comes to agriculture. And some of the months even speak to during a time when there's a lot of milk, because, the cows are being fed and they're being fat. And now, there's a lot of milk. So just that knowledge tells us then during certain times, there are certain activities that are able to happen. But does everybody know this? Does the big business that just wants, to get more, is there sensitivity to this? And maybe when we consult, then there's this opportunity then to help each other, and also to be able to see ourselves as protagonists at all settings. That each one of us has a great responsibility towards the other, not only for myself. So when we have this recognition that whatever I do has to be looking towards the betterment of humanity and not only for myself, then it becomes more easier for us to be willing to sit together and actually consult, and then ensure that we can take on the issues as they're coming up. Very important to that then becomes this process to learn together, instead of constantly stepping on each other's toes.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. It is important to consult. It is important to have those dialogues between the people and the government. And it is also important for government to want to listen, to want to engage earnestly, and accept that certain natural things happen. Indigenous practices will remain, because as long as people are still alive, they will remain. But along those dialogues, we need to be able to also engage business for them to understand. I'll just give an example, 2 examples of what happens if we don't actually respect those sacred places. I think it's in Umtata where we had a well, people would be taken there and they would heal. And it was tend to be some amusement park. But still, that river was there, it was left there. The ancestors who enabled the healing to happen left. There is no healing anymore. In Zimbabwe, there is also a stone that was said to talk, because it was actually utilized by ancestors or any other spiritual being that was there. It is gone. We were there last year. The stone says nothing now, but you have people who are going to try and rob people of money and say all sorts of things. So it is important to really engage with government and communities to share with them the importance of some of these sacred places. Because if we don't, we will lose the essence and actually the benefits that people gain from these spaces. For instance, in African indigenous spirituality, we regard a mountain as a temple. That is our first temple as African people. That's where we go have pilgrimages. That's where we go connecting to the Creator, connecting to ancestors, and doing all sorts of those things, just to enable ourselves to say we are still connected. To the extent that from my own spiritual home, we do have those annual pilgrimages to ensure that we don't lose the essence of the things that we have. as a nation, as black people. And I want to go back to the dialogues that we need to have continuously with government and business. And business will come with a notion of building wealth, but they should understand that in the process of wanting to build wealth, you will be actually eroding everything that is going to be talking about wealth, because they need to understand why the indigenous people would be talking about those spaces. And secondly, for government to also understand, and fortunately in South Africa, our government is led mostly at large by people who understand cultures, who understand traditions, though they change, who understands all the things that we're talking about, and would rely on government to say, okay, let's just do a pilot project to see whether what you're talking about works, in order for other people to understand and at least preserve what is, of course, indigenous, of course, African, of course, following our culture. But we also know that South Africa is not all about black people. We are a diverse nation. So we need to be able to teach each other, because I would think there are commonalities around us. We understand the notions of certain cultures, why they do certain things. Yesterday, we're reminded of the golden rule when we spoke about Ubuntu. And in essence, the golden rule that is used by any other person who's not African talks about Ubuntu. So we need to be able to dialogue and understand where the commonalities rest and what it is that we can preserve as the peoples of Africa, but specifically in South Africa. Because what we do as people in general, we do empower each other. But I want to come to the area that we're speaking about within the African indigenous spirituality. We know for a fact, we have over 10 million followers. And what we do, we empower them in each and every area of their lives. They are trained, they go to school, they get jobs, they have farms and everything else. And we ensure from our space, from the Revelation Spiritual Home, that these things happen. They could be looked as, yeah, it's one small thing, but it does have ripple effects. Whatever we do is not that small. If you have 10 million people, it will replicate to the extent that the whole nation will catch on. We also have engagements with people who do talk the same language. We may not be practicing the same things, but when it comes to dialogues, inviting government, we call everybody who speaks the same language to just enlighten, not necessarily enlighten, but remind our government, remind the departments that deal with such issues, to say, this is what we are doing. How can government work? We invite business people for them to understand. And fortunately, they understand issues of spirituality. They understand issues of culture. They understand issues of developing and empowering other people. So this is what we do every day of our lives. And then they would have to engage with us to say, if we want to use this area, what is it that you are losing? If I have to be removed from this area, taken to another one, I do not want to lose the essence of who I am as an African indigenous spirituality practitioner, including our people and companies that we have. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. We've got approximately half an hour more. I just want to share a little story. I was asked many years ago to address the local white Dutch Reformed church in a place in the Western Cape. It's close to Hermanus. It's just a little further south of Hermanus, Gansbaai. And I had a whole lot of talks I had to give in that week. And eventually I lost my voice on the Friday before I could speak on the Saturday and the Sunday. and they were giving me throat lozenges to soothe my throat and so forth. And the host took me to a very old white Afrikaans lady, and I could barely speak. And she says to me, "I will sort out your voice now." She went outside. She's found something called the Bushman plant. And if you've ever seen the Bushman plant, it's a very thick leaf plant. She went into a garden, she said, "Chew on this, suck the sap, and spit out the..." And I did that. The next day I was throat lozenges and all the other medications never helped. Rooibos, that has become a world-known herbal. Where did that come from? From African indigenous knowledge. And so one could go on and talk about many of the other plants that I think in one way or another way has taken indigenous knowledge system, commercialized it, and made billions of dollars from that. But I want to now open the meeting, the talk to each one of you. And I see there's a hand here with, who's got a roving mic? Okay, let me help you there.
A very provocative presentations from our panelists. Very indeed, very deep and profound. I think we need to understand the nature of power. The power of colonization. The power of slavery. And how the power has objectified the other. You become a cog in the machine. You become an object of profit. Now, if objectification has so intensified, who then thinks about issues of spirituality, issues of culture and values? Because you are then made to leave that was essential to you and adopt a culture of another, which we use the word conversion. In other words, conversion means moving from this to the other. And so the essence of African spirituality, the things that were very dear in promoting and making them who they were and making us who we are, they are all forgotten. And they pass on with history. This reminds me of a letter which was written in 1800s. It was written by King Leopold II of Belgium. He wrote to a group of missionaries who were destined to Congo to go and be missionaries there. He said to them, "You are going to Congo to represent the interest of Belgium. Not the interest of God, the interest of Belgium. Don't fool yourself to say that you are going to teach the Africans God because they know God. They have their own God. But you see, the drift is this. You are taking this in the name of God, closed in the name of the religion. But it's not about that. It's about the political power behind why you are taking your Christian religion there. So these are the key elements. Until you understand that, you will remain at the level of theorization about what the past was, because that past has been taken over. What we need is to retrieve, and the question, what is the action to take over, to retrieve and re-own that which we have lost?
Okay, here's one in front here and then one at the back.
Yeah, I think
Sorry, before you, is it a question that you perhaps want one of the panelists to answer, or the rhetorical? The rhetorical, okay.
okay. This is a very interesting discussion. Hi everyone, my name is Kudzanai Mutomba. I'm from the Rose Royal Council from Zimbabwe, from the traditional leaders. Thank you so much for mentioning our stone that was silenced. I think, firstly, I wanted to ask the presenters on how best can we rewrite our history, firstly, because if we look at the distinctive wisdom, most of it is not presented well in the literature. For example, in my culture, we practice rain appealing ceremony where we ask for the rains and they come. But then if you look in literature, they say we do rain-making ceremony. No one can make rain. But everywhere you go, you hear the Rose people, they do rain-making ceremony. We don't make rain, we ask for rain. It's one example. And then coming from that example, how best can we link our indigenous wisdom that we know that if we go during this period, from this period to this period, we ask for the rains, we are likely to receive them in this coming period, you see. But then now, when the rains come, now we have got climate change at the top of our community. When the rain come, long back, we would know that when that rain come, it will rain maybe for up to 12 days. That rain was going to sustain the community for the whole season. We'll just receive other few rains here and there, here and there. But the first rains, they were so powerful, so that they will sustain our rivers, our jungles, our mountains. But now, climate change and deforestation came. When that rain comes, in less than 2 weeks, the land is dry again. So how best now can we bring in the new technologies, for example, water harvesting methods, and many other technologies, so that they link and connect with our indigenous knowledge? And then my other question is, maybe which can be a contribution, how best can we try by all means to clean or to put our religion, our African traditions, on a clean sheet in terms of global perspective? I remember when I went for another program in Netherlands, and I said, I'm from the African traditional religion, and someone was saying, you practice black magic. And I said, what is black magic? He said, the spiritual method where someone can know what happens. I said, oh, okay. By that time, I haven't known much about black magic. For me, it's praying, it's spiritual. So I said, okay, so it's called black magic. He said, oh, yes. And then the other day when I was still there, we went in the street. We saw there was an advert on the door that there's someone who can read your palm, and they will tell you the future and what they can predict. And I said, oh, so this lady does black magic. He said, no, that's not black magic. I don't know, they've got a fancy name, it becomes attractive when it's there. But us, when we practice it here, it has got a very, very, very dark image. For example, mostly when you say I believe in African traditional religion, they think that, you strike someone with lightning, you disappear, you do all the funny stuff, But if you look at it, it's not like that, We pray, we do our things. There's the bad side, but then mostly for us, they are only marketing the negative side. But if you look at all religions, if you look at the regions where there are conflicts right now, usually, we can't be pointing to say, your religion does this, so you are wrong. But how best can we try to clean our religion so that it becomes, attractive, especially for the youth and the young people? Now they are scared that, if your fellow youth is practicing African traditional religion, beware, he will make you disappear, But that's not it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for that. They somewhat distinguish between magic with the end of the C and magic that ends with a CK. So there's a difference between those two type of magics. It depends what they were referring to there. Okay, but there was one more. What's your hand? We'll just take that 3 and then we'll come back to the rest.
My name is Cecil Plaikis. I think most of you were here in the morning when I spoke earlier. When it comes to African spirituality, in all its diversity, we cannot divorce it from the land, the ground that we're on. So, to restore what has been lost, I myself don't believe that it has been lost. It's never, spirituality is never lost. But the experience of loss, which we are all, the trauma of loss that we're all suffering from, to recover that, we have to deal with the land. And the land is important in spirituality, in all spirituality, because all people are indigenous and traditional, even though some might tell themselves that they're not. The reason why the land is important is because we are walking on our people. These are the bones, the blood, and the marrow of our people. This is what links us. This is our life. This is how we exist. Without this earth, I cannot be speaking to you now. Right? That is science. But actually the idea is our wisdom, our indigenous wisdom, the common indigenous wisdom of all people in the world. So recognizing the land and the fact that there are always people who walked on the land. Yes, we are also migrating people, so we moved from places to places. That is also a reality of our existence. But there are always people who lived on the land, and in any historical time period, you will find those people. So if I go to the USA today, I will find certain people there in that space. So when I come into that space, I'm a guest, and they are the hosts. So for me, I have to learn how to be a good guest. So I have to learn the ways and the mores of my host. But my host will also have to have an understanding that the guest doesn't know all the mores, doesn't know all the traditions and all the ways. So I'm also going to be accommodating to the guest. So some things I will let go, some things I will be more firm on from the position of the host. So it's these kind of relations, how as people, because my view is in the, at least African context, of the little that I know of my own tradition, there is, when we talk about each other, we talk about people. When we say San, we mean people. When we say Khoi, we mean people. When we say Mabantu, we mean people. So that's who we are. However we're going to label ourselves linguistically or culturally or according to the river or the mountain, that's that. It's okay. But we are actually we are all just people. So that respect and that dignity, to get that back, we have to respect the ancestors, the land. That is the main idea. I want to just, a simple thing. I practice Buddhism. Now, the Japanese, although they're not African, have exactly the same situation. Buddhism is the main religion in Japan. It's an imported religion from India. Originally, the religion started in India. The Japanese, their spirituality is Shinto. There is actually a Shinto priest a year at the event. And that is, so every Japanese person will practice Buddhism, but he is Shinto, he or she is Shinto first. That is my real religion. And that's the religion of the land. They go Mount Fuji, that's right in the center of the Japanese islands. That's the most sacred site. So you will find the Buddhist temples all on those sites. Even the tradition that I follow, the most sacred site is on that temple. So for me as a person, it is Hurikwaho. It is Table Mountain. That is the sacred site. And that's actually the site that, in my opinion, is drawing everybody to Africa, to South Africa. You know, it's a magnet because it's the place of the people, the place of origin. So for the panelists, perhaps we can go into the question of this connection with land and our spirituality and the loss of both, and how do we restore it?
Thank you very much. I think there's two questions. One was basically a comment, and then there are two questions. You can answer as you feel comfortable. Your question was the Zimbabwean issue and the Zimbabwean factor. Of course, there's a response to that. And then the other question is the spirituality and the land. Whichever one of you would like to answer that.
Thank you very much for the questions and the comment. I'm going to start on the comment. Prof. Suma is actually talking about a very important aspect of power. How would you respond from the various power angles he spoke about? And my comment as well is that as African people, we do have power that is within us. However, we allowed ourselves to believe that anything that is not coming from us, coming from other people, is what it is. Because you even find that with African representatives in government, for instance, they also come from the same notion. They are in government having been believing everything else but not believing themselves. There are ways of responding to this power, genuinely so as African indigenous peoples in South Africa. Who said Africans cannot even begin to start with their own African economy? But of course, you have to understand all the elements within the world economy as we understand it today. How do we counteract that? I know we talk about empowerment in various factors, but it also accommodates other people's thinking into how we can empower ourselves. So these dialogues that are required would have to touch all those aspects in saying, okay, we can restore our spirituality, we can remind each other where we come from, and you will decide whether you want to go that way or not that way, but there is no choice, because who you are is who you are. You can never change. And if you want to change to be something else, will you be accepted holistically? That's another angle, okay? And then we can begin talking about how do Africans actually, Africans in totality, begin to have their African economy. I know it is not as easy as I say it, but there are ways that could be done. Who said in 1,000 years to come or 100 years to come, we would not have notions of that, or we could be incorporated into what people think is the world economy? Because we feature nowhere as African people if you are talking about the world economy. And at the same time, there is a notion of the world order. But if you really study everything else that is happening, you know where it is going, and you cannot sit here and think, hey, I'm going to be talking about African indigenous spirituality. For what? Because it is not benefiting. You're just talking because of the sake of talking. So that's one angle. It is the restoration of who we are, and also thinking about what it is that is important for Africans to ensure that they get onto a world stage, because we are in no stage now. So it would be one, it is the restoration of African indigenous spirituality, or the restoration of our own spirituality. And in these dialogues, we need to begin to genuinely talk about an African economy, because it's got very relevant avenues we can traverse. It also has a very unique way of looking at our economy, which will not be a degraded economy. That's one thing. I'm just giving ideas of what could be done. Not that we haven't spoken about it where I come from. We have looked into so many aspects and things that could be done. we juxtapose what is happening with the world economy with what we think works and will work. So, having said that, we also need to be able to assert ourselves in terms of who we are. Because once you start to live who you are, your voice in the boardroom changes. I sit on boards. I'm no longer talking dog eat dog. I will show you where I studied, what degrees I have, what is it that you don't have. But there's a voice that's talking to me to say, issues are supposed to be addressed in this manner and that manner. And you tend to be surprised to say, wow, you have this support, and unintentionally you were telling them that there needs to be a change. But you are not saying it in a manner that is now going to say, you know what, I'm going to stand on this table. Until you do that, I'm not getting down. So there are quite a lot of things and wisdoms that we have as people, especially with African people. But we tend to shy away from what it is that we have. We acknowledge those that are in power, we respect them, but we may not necessarily agree with everything else that we are being fed. So that is coming from us, from our position to say, how do you change things? How do you influence? Because you cannot change on your own. You need to be influencing people the manner people would want to be influenced for their benefit as well, because you cannot be looking from your side to benefit, but all of us have got to benefit. I'm not sure whether I've covered all the questions. Okay, I want to come to the question about acknowledging and or accepting or claiming the land as ours. Okay. Where I'm sitting is the land is ours and everybody else that lives on it. And if I look at where our ancestors are, they are not necessarily on this land, but they are beneath. It's a pity I can't translate vernacular, but I'll try. You know, when you go to traditional healers, and I am not, but I know what happens. When you go to them, when they want to connect you with your ancestors, they say we are lifting them up. Siyabakhuphula. And you are lifting something that is underneath. So as they talk to you, I'm sure you see it on shows as well, that we are lifting up your ancestors to connect with us as we're sitting here to address the issues that you have. So as we lift up our ancestors, we do that to do certain things. But as we walk on the ground, we walk on the ground with reverence that we know that underneath this ground, there are people who are dear to me, who actually connect with what my daily living. And you find that there's also the earthly realm and the higher realm, where issues of spirituality, they're not dealt there underneath. Here they deal with my day-to-day life. Those that are at the higher level are the ones that talk about our spirituality and guide us as people on this earth. I tried to answer what you were talking about, but this is what I know happens. Thank you.
Makwena, would you like to respond to?
Yes, please. You know, when Prof. Musoma spoke about this recognition and acknowledgement of the power of colonization, it reminded me of a conversation I was having with one of the youth who is here. And he said, you know, for us youth, some of these older things that have, events of the past, some of what has happened before, is not so attached to us. For us, it's not so deep. These are the words that they used. And I appreciated that in the sense that then as a parent who's got youth in my home, what are the things that I'm teaching them that are either making things too deep when they don't necessarily need to be? So how am I possibly without even noticing, steering them in a certain direction that leaves them with a certain mentality, particularly the mentality of victimhood. Instead of saying, yes, what happened to us happened as Africans, but how do we move forward? Then they end up with this thing that, yeah, but this happened to my mother. This happened to her grandmother. Yes, it happened. And my feeling is we don't discard it or see it as irrelevant or unnecessary. It's part of our history. It's part of who we are. But then how do we also move forward without this, I want to call it ABS, that we install in our children that holds them back to only the pains? How do we create a situation that allows them to be able to gain the victories and the joys above the pains? Which for me also takes me to our young man's question that says, how do we rewrite history? And I wonder, do we want to rewrite? We've experienced it. How about we think about writing, changing the narrative for the future? Right? How about we think from where we are, how do we move forward in a way that then is not only positive, but also shows that the African traditions actually have a place and have a positive contribution towards all of humanity that they can also give. And you know, even this question about how best do we link our indigenous practices and knowledge with new technologies. For me, that this assumes that we are outside of the technologies. Because if as an African, I don't see myself taking part in the life of humanity now and contributing to maybe the development of these technologies, and there is no way for me to try and take my place and being in those circles, then it always has to be somebody is bringing them to me, and now they must adapt, or I have to adapt my traditions to this. And yet we have an example of something I was reading, passing through social media, where they're showing some of, some unsolved mysteries in the life of humanity, one of them being the pyramids of Giza. They were built how many years ago, and we're still unsure as to how was this undertaking done. All of those, building blocks that were brought from, distances. How was this done without the technology that we have today? So clearly there is wisdom, there's intelligence, but maybe the issue becomes there is this perceived divide. There is this perceived outwardness or outsideness, actually, that it feels like the feeling is that this is something that is brought by someone. This reminded me of a story when one of the times I was interviewed on the national radio of the Lesedi FM, which is a Sotho, station, the primarily Sotho-speaking station, and I was explaining about the Baha'i faith, and one of the gentlemen calls and says, one of our problems as Africans is that we are easily swayed. Because now you're here speaking about the Baha'i faith, and yet, this is one of those religions that has come on a boat from somewhere else. We should stick to our Africanness and stay African. And in that moment, I was thinking, and yet we're speaking on a cell phone that you don't know whether was, invented by an African or not. Maybe, maybe not. We're living in dwellings that you don't know was designed by an African, maybe not, in the way that it is right now. We're using these technologies so clearly for me, humanity can benefit to learn from each other much more than to break apart and say, because we are African, our Africanness demands that all we are is this. But the moment we come together, it's then a different matter. Not only come together as Africans, but come together as humanity. Because then we're able to actually advance civilization. Then we're able to contribute to the material and spiritual progress of all of humanity, because then we don't close ourselves off to the one aspect of who we are. So on this aspect of the power of colonization, it's like, thank God for the youth, and thank God for that we move along, because perhaps for them they will say, for me, it's not that deep. And that will come off from us. But I think it's important as well for them to know what happened, to be aware of the histories, but not to be bogged down by it. You know, in the Baha'i faith, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith says to us, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So as long as we're pulling apart from each other, at least this is what I take from that, as long as we're pulling away from each other, seeking to say, but with the way you look, I know you're Indian, therefore you are not the African that I am, even if you might be somewhere close to Africa. It's not, as long as we're saying that, we're not going to see our collective well-being. We're not going to see, the advancement that I think all of us want to see. And I found it interesting that, with our theme being Ubuntu in action, and we know very well Ubuntu means I am because we are, right? And this is not only about me and me because we're probably similar tribes, similar what, but the same as you, the same as everybody else in this room, because we are all united. And when we are united, outwardly we look very different, but it was also shared with us that we're all made in the image of God, the image and likeness of God, which is not this outer, right? So as long as we don't elevate ourselves to that level, then we're going to stay stuck in this boxes that we have put ourselves in that are not conducive to the advancement of civilization. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. We just got so two more hands. I think it was one was yours and one was yours. Okay, let's go with you, my brother, then we've concluded with my sister.
Thank you very much. Oscar is the name, Siwali. I work in peace building. I think the 2-3 comments that I running through my mind is, there's the word that we've probably been running around that's called capitalism, and capitalism is this whole the fight between capitalism and the exploits that it results in. And I think that's probably what we're not addressing, the fact that if we're talking about traditional communities, if we're talking about how do we go back, we have to address the issue of capitalism, and which is based on extraction, which is based on lording it over others, which is based on a few getting richer and the many getting poorer, and a million working for one person to have more, because that's the basis of what the whole capitalistic approach is about. So that's just me parking that. But the 2-3 comments that I wanted to make, I mean, I've been fascinated going around the world in different communities, one being the indigenous communities of America, and how their understanding of the world, the earth, and our practices connects all together, and how our respect for the world, for the earth, and for the plants, for the animals, all connects together into what everybody is now beginning to see slowly, that if we take care of the animals, if we take care of the bees, we will all survive for another 1,000 years. I mean, we've been saying this forever, and people look at everything as something to exploit. And so when you exploit things, at some time, you end up being in a place where you can't do that anymore. So that's the one thing. And the second one for me is, when we looking at this topic of this wisdom, for me it's really addressing fundamental challenges in South Africa. One being the issue of identity. And the issue of identity is a major, if you go to all the prisons right now, you will discover that a number of the young men who are in prison, they grappling with the issue of identity. And part of the reason for that is that within the whole tradition, we've lost what identity is all about. And so identity has been something around a surname, and it's lost its essence, where even a child that has grown up in an environment where they didn't have parents, they could actually be assimilated into a family. And that will be their identity. In fact, I met a young man here and I saw his surname. And I said to him, "Are you part of this?" And I gave him the clan name, and he said, "No, no, no, I'm not part of that family. But that family took my great-grandfather when we were abandoned," and he gave me the whole story. But just from his surname, I could understand, and he was able to share with me the whole story. So the issue of identity is part of what causes crisis, especially here in South Africa as I talk to young men in my line of work, as I visit prisons and places like that. And when a person's identity is challenged, their whole balance of life has a major challenge. And the last thing for me is this issue of food security. And the Prof touched on, I don't know in what language he would understand this. In isiXhosa, we say inkomo yenqoma insengebheka, but it's exactly what he was explaining, of a person who doesn't have anything, who would be given a cow and given some seeds and helped to plant, and so that that family can also have. And this whole idea of poverty, because everybody is looking after themselves, is very foreign in terms of where we come from as a people. And so I think going back there needs us to confront the giant of capitalism. And how do we confront that? Mays is talking about dialogues, and I think maybe there might be even more to do, even policies that need to come up if we are actually going to get there. I don't think we can get there without government. Somehow we need to be able to engage government to walk with us towards that direction. Thank you so much.
My sister in front, Professor Mageto, I'm going to ask you to stand over, but you know me, but let's see how it goes, okay? My sister, please.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I might make it brief because a lot of what he covered was top of mind for me. I think this whole question of capitalism, from the perspective of human progress being measured by how much individuals own, how much they have to their name, and that was, for traditional societies, that was never the measure of success. But now it is. And so because of that, there's been quite a big distortion in terms of what people aspire to, what people are willing to do for others, what they're willing to sacrifice or give up. I was working for a number of years going across, I live in Zambia and that's where I'm from, going across many traditional communities, trying to understand the question of land registration and ownership and land use. And it was fascinating and usually very heartbreaking for me to see what was happening, because everybody wanted to have not just registered their land, but it be identified as their own with a title deed, because that's what happens in the city, right? Even in the remotest areas, people are doing that. So then you'll find even the traditional leader, the traditional leaders, the chiefs, our kings, and so on, the place where the castle is now titled to them. And I would look at that and go, how is this possible? Because this is the custodian of the land and this is owned by you for us, right? So, but now if you own it in your name, I don't know what this means anymore. And so for me, those were the struggles in terms of just, back to the question of identity. So do I now identify with that chief or do I not? Is that crow a site of reverence for me as the traditional place where we connect with ancestors through our king? Or is it the land of the king because he owns a big mansion on it? And they're doing that, right? And they even fence it with an electric wire. They're doing that. So for me, it's just the difficulty of that. And then the question around what that land means. The extension then is you have lots of challenges with what is communal and what is shared knowledge, what is shared assets that That concept is becoming very difficult to explain or understand. So because everything is titled, where is grazing land, for instance? You know, so it feels like a small thing when you say it's capitalism, it's only, but when you think about the actual realities and how it's looking like, then you start to understand the problems that we have created and are creating. And the title deeds belong to certain families or certain individuals who then go and live in Lusaka, in the city. But I can't do anything. I can't put my animals on their land to graze because they own it and they've put a fence around it. So it's a challenge in terms of everything. Yeah.
No, thank you. Wow. Maybe I want to give my brother. He's looking at me like, say, you know, I feel so sad now. So maybe
Prof,
after you, I'm not too sure if you can ask a question or make a comment.
points.
But after you ask or make a comment, then I'm going to ask you 1 minute to wrap up because we're already over time. We're already 10 to 1. Just a minute each to wrap up after Professor Mageto.
No, just 2 comments. One, there's distinctive wisdom indeed. But if we are not careful, it will be extinctive. And one of the key challenges that faces traditional communities, especially traditional spiritualities, is the question of preservation of this indigenous knowledge. Where I come from, we have noted with interest, and for the last 17 years, we have been working with the World Intellectual Property Organization, with the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, where every year we take a group of students from the continent of Africa, at least 29 of them at the level of graduate level, and we are pushing them with the agenda of intellectual property. And this intellectual property is very important because it is the preservation of the traditional indigenous communities, spiritualities, seeds, whatever that is called traditional. And until we move to that point, the world has become a global village. Today we'll be singing as if we want to rewrite history. We can't rewrite history. We must keep the story in the language that the generation we wish to pass this wisdom to would understand. And I plead that as we move these traditional communities, let us move them into the level of intellectual property. Whether that means patenting, whether that means trademarking, whether that means copywriting, whichever we can do, as long as it's part of our spirituality. We speak as of now, tomorrow we will not be there to speak about that. Will someone make reference to it and say, yeah, there is a level of continuity? How do we assure that that remains then our intellectual property at the level of traditional spirituality that we want to pass on? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. If you want to continue the conversation, of course, you're welcome during the tea break. But I want to give my sisters at least 1 minute to wrap up. You don't have to respond to all the comments and things, but just to wrap up in a minute. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. I just want to thank everybody for giving us this opportunity to share the spaces from which we come from. But there's a lot of wisdom around the room. For instance, it is important, as Prof. Masoma said, that you have to understand the different levels of power. But once you understand it, what is it that you're going to be doing? Or what is it that you want to do? And I would think the panelists tried to share what could be done. And we accept and acknowledge everybody else that has shared their views in terms of the topic of today. But I still say we have to resurrect our own spirituality, because it then guides us in terms of what it is that we have to do. Just to comment on the comment that was shared with us by my brother around people who are in prison. You would be surprised that the element of ancestry plays a big role. People probably commit certain crimes not because they wanted to, but it is kind of like a lineage. There is an ancestor somewhere who actually was forever in prison, but it is still the ancestors who will fix that. But how does a young person know that? It is about us talking about these things so that people could be assisted, so that the prisons themselves, the prison warders, need to understand what it is that they have to do to assist those people who are in prison. You know, it's a subject on its own, but we do not have time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the Baha'i writings, we are counseled to let deeds and not words be our adorning. At the opening, Professor Musoma said, history will not remember us by the things that we said and we wrote, but by what we did. And the theme is Ubuntu in action. My hope is that for all of us who are here in this space, that spirit of being protagonists we take back to others. We share and we light others to become protagonists, and also to be able to give forth fruits and show action that will contribute towards the advancement of all of humanity. That the action part becomes critical to us, enough that instead of asking who or why or how, we also at the same time ask when, so that then action can happen. Thank you.
Well, let's give our guest, our panelists, a wonderful hand. I really wish we had more time. Maybe we could have put on 10 statements to say this is how distinctive knowledge in the African indigenous communities can contribute to address the challenges, but also offer solutions to the crises that we are facing. Time is always of the essence, and we never seem to have time. But thank you very, very much. Thank you to yourself for joining us in this conversation. Thank you very, very much.